The telegram crumpled in Lorelei Ashford's gloved hand as the last train whistle faded into the December twilight, taking her intended connection with it. She stood alone on a weathered platform that shouldn't have existed. Sweetbriar Crossing. Population unknown, future uncertain. Miss, you can't stay here. The station master, already locking the ticket window, didn't look back. Next train's not till after New Year's. Town's 3 miles north, but they don't take kindly to strangers on Christmas Eve. Lorelei's carefully planned escape from Philadelphia from her father's gambling debts and the leering creditor who'd offered to settle accounts with her hand in. Marriage dissolved into the growing dark. She'd miscalculated the connection by one stop. One simple, devastating stop. Please, I have money for lodging. Ain't about money. The station master's keys jangled with finality. It's about being sensible. Storm's coming, and this platform floods when the creek rises. He disappeared into the station house, and a moment later the lamps went dark. Lorelei pulled her wool coat tighter, fighting the tremor in her hands. She'd sold her mother's pearl necklace for this journey west, burned every bridge, sent word to the teaching position in Santa Fe that she'd arrived before Christmas. The school expected her, needed her. She'd staked everything on hoofbeats. A rider emerged from the tree line, guiding a paint horse with the kind of natural grace that suggested man and animal shared one mind. Even in the dying light, Lorelei could see his Apache features: high cheekbones, long black hair tied back with leather cord, buckskin jacket that spoke of practicality rather than pretense. He reined in 20 feet away, studying her with eyes that missed nothing. You're the Easterner. Not a question. His voice carried the faint musical cadence of his first language beneath the English. Cyprus told me someone got off at the wrong stop. Cyprus? The station master. He bet me $1 you'd still be here, too stubborn to walk to town in those shoes. The rider's gaze dropped to her impractical leather boots, designed for Philadelphia sidewalks, not Arizona wilderness. I told him Eastern women had more sense. Heat flooded Lorelei's cheeks despite the cold. I'm perfectly capable of walking 3 miles in the dark with a storm coming, in boots that'll give you blisters in half a mile. He dismounted in one fluid motion, revealing a frame both lean and powerful. I'm Nashoba Bege. My ranch is 2 miles south. You can shelter there tonight, ride into Sweetbriar proper tomorrow when it's light. I couldn't possibly impose. You're not imposing. You're accepting common sense. He pulled a second horse from the shadows, a gentle-eyed mare already saddled. This is Willow. She doesn't spook, and she knows the way home better than I do. Lorelei's Eastern propriety warred with her circumstances. Everything she'd been taught said accepting help from a strange man, riding to his isolated ranch, was inviting ruin. But those same Eastern rules had nearly married her off to a man 3 times her age with wandering hands and bourbon breath. Why are you helping me? She needed to understand his motive, needed some logic in this increasingly illogical day. Nashoba adjusted Willow's stirrups with practiced efficiency. Because my grandmother was left at a trading post once. Winter of 1842, white man's trading post, Apache woman alone. She said a Navajo shepherd helped her, asked nothing in return. He looked up, and in his eyes Lorelei saw something she hadn't expected: complete sincerity. Some debts get paid forward, Miss Ashford. How did you... Cyprus read the name on your trunk before he locked up. Small towns have efficient information networks. The hint of humor in his voice steadied something in her chest. We can stand here debating propriety until the creek rises, or you can get on that horse. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Deciding for her, Lorelei approached Willow, and Nashoba helped her mount with the impersonal efficiency of a man handling a practical problem. As they rode into the darkness, she realized she'd just trusted her life to a complete stranger. But this time felt different. This time felt like the beginning of something rather than the end. The Bege ranch house materialized from the darkness like something from a fever. Dream-solid adobe walls glowing amber from lamplight within. Smoke curling from a stone chimney, corrals stretching into shadow where horses moved like ghosts. Nothing about it matched Lorelai's Eastern expectations of frontier poverty. You seem surprised. Nashoba dismounted, offering his hand to help her down. What were you expecting? A tippy? The directness of the question startled her into honesty. I don't know what I was expecting. Most white folks expect either savagery or squalor. Sometimes both. He led the horses toward the barn, and Lorelai caught the edge in his voice, not quite bitterness, but something worn smooth by repetition. My father was Apache. My mother was Mexican. I was raised between three worlds and trusted by none of them completely. This ranch is what happens when you stop caring about trust and start caring about cattle. The barn smelled of hay and leather and the warm, earthy presence of animals. Nashoba worked with efficient silence, unsaddling both horses, checking their hooves, measuring grain with the attention of a man for whom horses meant survival, not sport. You run this place alone? Lorelai asked, watching him work. I have 2 hands who help during roundup. Paco and his son Tomas. They're in Tucson visiting Paco's sister for Christmas. He hung the saddles with careful precision. The rest of the time, yes, alone. Something in that single word carried weight, not loneliness exactly, but the acknowledgement of a choice that hadn't been entirely choice. Inside, the ranch house proved even more unexpected. Books lined 2 walls of the main room, actual books, leather-bound and well-thumbed. A Franklin stove radiated heat. Hand-woven blankets in brilliant geometric patterns decorated the furniture. Everything spoke of a man who'd built a life deliberately, thoughtfully. Against considerable odds, you can have my sister's room. Nashoba lit a lamp, illuminating a small bedroom off the main living area. She married a blacksmith in Santa Fe 3 years ago. The bed's still made. Santa Fe. The word hit Lorelai like a physical blow. That's where I was headed. To teach at the mission school. She sank onto the edge of the bed, exhaustion finally overtaking adrenaline. I was supposed to arrive before Christmas. They'll think I've abandoned the position. Or they'll think you got caught in a storm and had sense enough to shelter. Nashoba leaned against the doorframe, studying her with that unsettling directness. You send that telegram from Swiprior tomorrow, explain what happened. If they're worth working for, they'll understand. And if they don't? Then you didn't want to work for them anyway. He pushed off the doorframe. There's water in the pitcher, extra quilts in the chest. I'll make coffee and something to eat. He left her alone, and Lorelai finally allowed herself to truly see her situation. She was alone in a stranger's house, miles from anywhere, with no money for a hotel and no guarantee of employment. By Philadelphia standards, she was ruined. By Philadelphia standards, she should be terrified. Instead, she felt the strangest sense of relief. She washed her face in the basin, studying herself in the small mirror above the dresser. 23 years old, brown hair fighting its pins, green eyes that her mother once said saw too much and forgave too little. A face that had smiled through her father's drunken promises, her stepmother's cold dismissal, her near-miss escape from a marriage that would have killed everything essential in her in the main room. Nashoba was frying salt pork and eggs with the competence of a man long accustomed to his own company. The domesticity of it struck her, this Apache rancher, this man caught between worlds, cooking Christmas Eve supper in a house he'd built with his own hands. Tell me about your sister. Lorelai settled at the rough-hewn table, needing the normalcy of conversation. His expression softened infinitesimally. Desba, it means going to war in Navajo. My mother had opinions about raising a daughter who could defend herself. He poured coffee, strong and black. She's stubborn, brilliant, completely unimpressed by anyone's expectations. You'd like her. She sounds remarkable. She is. She's also 6 months pregnant and happier than I've ever seen her. He set a plate before Lorelai, the gesture somehow formal. Her husband, Joaquin, treats her like she hung the moon. It's nauseating and wonderful in equal measure. Lorelai heard the love beneath the humor, the deep satisfaction of a brother who'd seen his sister find genuine happiness. You miss her, every day. He sat across from her, cradling his coffee. But missing someone because they're living their best life is different from missing someone because you lost them. One you can live with. They ate in comfortable silence, the kind that Lorelei had rarely experienced in Philadelphia's suffocating social circles where every pause demanded filling with meaningless pleasantries. Here, in this lamplit room with wind beginning to howl outside, silence felt like its own language. Why teaching? Nashoba asked finally, pushing his empty plate aside. The question was simple. The answer wasn't. Because I'm good at it, and because it was the only respectable escape route I could find. Lorelei surprised herself with the honesty. My father gambled away everything my mother left me. When he died last spring, his debts became mine by default. A man named Cornelius Blackwell offered to clear them if I'd marry him. He's 62, has buried 3 wives, and believes women exist primarily for decoration and childbearing. So you ran. I ran. She met his eyes. The mission school in Santa Fe offered $30 a month and room and board. It's not much, but it's mine. Or it was supposed to be. Nashoba studied her with that unnerving directness. You're afraid you've traded one trap for another, aren't I? Stranded, nearly penniless, dependent on the kindness of strangers? The fear she'd been suppressing all evening finally cracked through. I sold everything I owned for that teaching position. If they don't honor it, I have nowhere to go. You have here. The words hung in the air between them. Simple and impossible. I don't even know you. But even as Lorelei said it, she recognized the lie. She'd spent the last 3 hours learning this man through his actions, the care he took with his horses, the books on his shelves, the way he spoke of his sister, the home he'd built from nothing. No, Nashoba agreed. But you know I won't hurt you, and you know this ranch always needs work. Teaching would be wasted here. But I need someone who can manage accounts, write correspondence, handle the business side while I handle the cattle. He stood, collecting plates with the same efficiency he brought to everything. $35 a month, room and board, and complete independence. You'd have Desba's room, your own space. Nothing expected except honest work. Why would you offer that? Lorelei's heart hammered against her ribs. You don't know if I can even do what you're describing. You sold your mother's jewelry, calculated a cross-country journey, and had the courage to leave everything you knew for something uncertain. He turned from the basin, water dripping from his hands. Most of my correspondence with cattle buyers and supply merchants has been conducted by memory, because I was never taught to read until I was 14. Desba handled the paperwork before she married. I've been managing without. But managing isn't the same as thriving. The vulnerability in that admission made something crack open in Lorelei's chest. You're offering me a job out of kindness. I'm offering you a job because I need help and you need work. The kindness is being honest about it instead of pretending it's charity. He dried his hands on a towel, his movements deliberate. But the offer stands regardless. Stay the night, send your telegram tomorrow. If Santa Fe comes through, I'll personally ensure you make that connection. If they don't, you have options. Options. The word felt like oxygen after years of suffocation. I should refuse on principle. Lorelei stood, carrying her own coffee cup to the basin. A proper lady doesn't accept employment from a bachelor rancher. Good thing propriety got left at that train station then. The corner of his mouth lifted, not quite a smile, but close. Besides, Paco's wife, Dulcinea, comes by twice a week to trade eggs and vegetables from their garden. She ensures I'm not compromising anyone's reputation. Apache grandmother or not, that woman strikes fear into the hearts of stronger men than me. Despite everything, Lorelei laughed. The sound surprised her. When had she last laughed without calculation, without measuring the social cost? Outside, the storm finally broke, rain hammering against the windows like thrown stones. Thunder shook the walls, and somewhere in the darkness, cattle lowed their unease. I should check the herd. Nashoba reached for his oilskin coat. The winter pasture has good shelter, but newborn calves can get separated in weather like this. Newborn? In December? A few late births from cows that got bred late last spring. Nature doesn't always follow convenient schedules. He settled his hat, already half transformed into someone different, the working rancher, the man who measured life in livestock and seasons. Stay inside? There's more coffee on the stove and books if you can't sleep. He disappeared into the storm, and Lorelei found herself standing at the window. Watching his lamp bob through the darkness like a desperate star, Lorelei woke to silence. The storm had passed, leaving behind that peculiar crystalline quality of desert air after rain. Through the window, dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold that would have made Philadelphia's dirty sunrises weep with envy. She dressed quickly, twisting her hair into a practical bun, and ventured into the main room. Nashoba sat at the table, ledgers spread before him, a pencil gripped in his hand with the awkward tension of someone for whom writing remained a laborious translation between thought and paper. "You're up early," he said without looking up. "Coffee's still hot." Lorelei poured a cup, studying the ledgers over his shoulder. The entries were sparse, dates and numbers with minimal notation, everything compressed into the shorthand of someone conserving effort. "May I?" She gestured to the books. He slid them toward her with something like relief. "Be my guest. I've been trying to reconcile the feed costs against last quarter's sales, but the numbers refuse to cooperate." Lorelei sat, running her finger down the columns. Within minutes, she'd spotted the problem: a transposed figure from September. Small enough to miss, large enough to throw everything else into chaos. She found a fresh sheet of paper, reconstructed the math, and circled the corrected total. "There, you're actually $53 ahead of where you thought you were." Nashoba stared at the figure like it might sprout wings. "That took you 5 minutes. That's what happens when someone teaches you proper bookkeeping instead of expecting you to deduce it from first principles." She flipped through the other ledgers, seeing patterns, gaps, opportunities. "You're undercharging for your horses. I saw the stock in your corral last night. Those are quality animals. You could easily get 20% more. The buyers in Tucson say the buyers in Tucson are lying to you." Lorelei pulled out another ledger, found the comparative figures. "Here, these are standard rates from the livestock exchange. You're being taken advantage of, probably because they assume you don't know better." She watched the understanding move across his face, followed by something darker: the recognition of casual prejudice embedded in every transaction, every negotiation, every interaction with the white merchants who controlled the markets. Of course they are. He leaned back, something weary in the gesture. The Apache rancher probably doesn't read, probably doesn't understand real business. Give him enough to keep him quiet, but not enough to actually prosper. Then we changed the game. We slipped out before Lorelei could stop it, but she didn't take it back. "I write the correspondence, you deliver the horses. They deal with the Bege Ranch as a business entity, not a person they can condescend to." Nashoba studied her with new intensity. "You've been here less than 12 hours, and you're already plotting economic warfare. I've been dealing with men who underestimate women my entire life. I know every trick in that particular playbook." She tapped the ledger. "The question is whether you're willing to push back, or whether you've decided the path of least resistance is easier." The challenge hung between them, and Lorelei half expected offense. Instead, Nashoba laughed, a genuine sound of surprised delight. "Desba's going to love you." He stood, gathering his hat. "All right, Miss Ashford. You want to declare war on my buyers? We'll declare war. But first we ride to Swiftbriar so you can send that telegram to Santa Fe." The ride into town revealed a landscape transformed by rain desert blooming in impossible colors. Creeks running silver, the air so clear it seemed possible to see forever. Nashoba rode with the unconscious grace of someone for whom horses were partnership rather than transportation, and Willow responded to Lorelei's tentative guidance with patient forgiveness of her eastern incompetence. Whitbriar Crossing proved to be less a town and more an optimistic collection of buildings. The train station, a general store, a blacksmith, a boarding house that doubled as a restaurant, and a white-painted church that looked like someone's fever dream of Eastern respectability transplanted into desert soil. Eyes followed them down the main street, curious, assessing, not quite hostile but nowhere near welcoming. Lorelei felt the weight of their judgment, the quick calculations behind every glance. Let them look. Nashoba's voice carried only to her. Swiftbriar makes its living off the ranch trades. They need me more than I need them, and they know it. The telegraph office occupied a corner of the general store, presided over by a pinch-faced woman who looked at Lorelei like she'd arrived covered in scandal. I need to send a telegram to Santa Fe. Lorelei kept her voice level, refusing to acknowledge the disapproval radiating from the woman like heat from a stove. That'll be 60 cents. The woman slid a form across the counter. Though I suppose Mr. Begay will be paying, seeing as you're his guest. The implication hung there, ugly and obvious. I pay my own way. Lorelei counted out coins, meeting the woman's eyes without flinching. And my arrangements are none of your concern. She wrote quickly, delayed Swiftbriar crossing storm stop. Arriving within weak stop position still available query. She signed it. Paid and turned to leave. Miss Ashford? The woman's voice stopped her at the door. Word of advice? Whatever you think you're doing out at that ranch, folks around here have long memories. Apache and white don't mix, not in ways that end well. Nashoba had gone still beside her, every muscle coiled with the effort of not responding. Lorelei turned back slowly, and the woman actually flinched at whatever she saw in Lorelei's expression. Mrs. Lorelei glanced at the name embroidered on the woman's collar. Fletcher. I fled Philadelphia to escape a forced marriage to a man who believed women were property. I sold my inheritance for train fare and arrived at the wrong station in the middle of a storm. Mr. Begay offered shelter, food, and employment when he could have easily left me to freeze on that platform. So when I weigh his character against yours, the scales aren't even close to balanced. She collected her receipt with crisp finality. Good day. Outside, Nashoba was already mounted, his face carefully neutral. Lorelei climbed onto Willow with considerably more grace than yesterday, and they rode in silence until Swiftbriar disappeared behind them. You didn't have to do that, he said finally. Do what? Tell the truth? Lorelei adjusted her grip on the reins. Mr. Begay, Nashoba, if you're going to defend my honor, we should probably dispense with formalities. Despite everything, she smiled. Nashoba, then. And I'm Lorelei, not Miss Ashford. He reined in at the crest of a small rise, overlooking his land thousands of acres of desert grassland stretching toward mountains that scraped the sky. That woman, Mrs. Fletcher? Her husband tried to buy this land from me 2 years ago. Offered about a third of what it's worth, acted like he was doing me a favor. The bitterness had crept back into his voice. When I refused, he tried to get the territorial government to claim it for unpaid taxes. Taxes I'd paid 6 months early. What happened? Desba rode to Tucson with receipts and a lawyer we couldn't afford. She stood in that government office and dared them to steal from an Apache who'd followed every white man's law to the letter. Pride warmed his voice. They backed down. But the Fletchers haven't forgiven the embarrassment. Lorelei understood then the weight of every interaction, every transaction, every moment of existence in a world designed to erase him. How do you bear it? By building something they can't take away. By being so good at what I do that they need me more than I need them. He looked at her then, really looked, and Lorelei felt seen in a way she'd never experienced. By recognizing allies when they appear, even if they arrive at the wrong train station on Christmas Eve, something shifted between them. Subtle as the desert wind and just as undeniable, they rode back to the ranch in companionable silence. And Lorelei spent the afternoon transforming his chaotic reg-keeping into something approaching professional order. She wrote letters to new buyers in Phoenix and Albuquerque, researched pricing through old issues of the Territorial Cattleman's Journal, and sketched out a business plan that made Nashoba whistle low when he reviewed it at dinner. You want me to start breeding quarter horses specifically for ranch work? He tapped the proposal. That's ambitious. That's profitable. There's a market gap, and you have the expertise to fill it. Lorelei had spent hours on this, losing herself in the kind of intellectual challenge she'd been starving for. You're already raising quality horses almost by accident. Why not make it intentional? Because it requires capital I don't have. It requires capital you can borrow against future sales, using the improved rates we're about to negotiate as collateral. She pulled out the financial projections, showing him the numbers. You're not asking for charity? You're asking for a business loan based on proven capacity and market demand. He studied the figures with the intensity of a man who understood risk intimately. And if it fails? Then we adjust and try something else. But Nashoba, you've been thinking small because you were taught that's all you're allowed to be. What if that's wrong? The question hung in the lamplight, and Lorelei watched him wrestle with decades of learned limitation, of being told through 1,000 small cruelties that he should be grateful for scraps. All right. The decision came quietly, but with absolute conviction. We try it your way. But if this goes sideways, then we fail together, and I'll take equal blame. She extended her hand across the table, formal and serious. Partners. He took her hand, and the contact sent electricity through her entire body. Partners. 3 days later, the telegram arrived. Position filled, stop assumed, abandonment, stop regrets. Lorelei read it 3 times, each word a small death of carefully constructed hope. She'd gambled everything on Santa Fe, and Santa Fe had moved on without her. She found Nashoba in the barn, working with a young colt, his movements patient and sure. He looked up as she entered, and something in her face must have told the story because his expression shifted to immediate understanding. They filled the position. They filled the position. Lorelei leaned against a post, suddenly exhausted. I'm officially stranded, or officially employed, depending on perspective. He gentled the colt with a final stroke, then turned his full attention to her. Lorelei, the offer I made wasn't contingent on Santa Fe refusing you. I need help. You need work. Nothing about that has changed. Everything's changed. That was a legitimate teaching position with respectable lodgings, and this is a legitimate business position with private lodgings and a partner who won't condescend to you. He crossed to where she stood, close enough that she could see gold flecks in his dark eyes. Unless you're telling me you'd rather spend your life teaching other people's children than building something of your own. The question struck deeper than he probably intended. I don't know what I want anymore, Lorelei admitted, the confession surprising her with its honesty. I thought I had it figured out. Escape Philadelphia, teach in Santa Fe, build a quiet, respectable life far from anyone who could control me. Now that plan's gone, and I'm standing in a barn in Arizona contemplating a business partnership with a man I met 4 days ago. When you say it like that, it does sound somewhat impulsive. The dry humor in Nashoba's voice broke through her spiral. But then, you sold your inheritance and crossed the country on the strength of a letter from strangers. Impulsive might be your natural state. That's different. That was the same thing. A calculated risk based on incomplete information and faith that you could handle whatever came next. He leaned against the opposite post, studying her. The question isn't whether this is impulsive. The question is whether you trust yourself enough to try. Lorelei closed her eyes, thinking of Philadelphia, her father's study reeking of bourbon and desperation, her stepmother's cold dismissal, Cornelius Blackwell's presumptuous hands on her waist at the engagement party she'd fled 2 days later. She'd spent her entire life being told who she should be, what she should want, how she should limit herself to fit within acceptable boundaries. What if I fail? The question came out smaller than she intended. Then you fail. But at least you'll fail at something you chose instead of something that was chosen for you. Nashoba pushed off the post, his movements carrying that same effortless grace that had caught her attention 5 days ago. Lorelei, I'm not offering you a cage. I'm offering you a chance to build something that matters, with complete autonomy over how you do it. If you hate it after 3 months, you take your wages and go somewhere else. But at least you'll have tried. The simplicity of it, the absolute lack of strings or expectations beyond honest work made something crack open in her chest. This wasn't a romantic rescue or a proposal disguised as employment. This was a genuine offer of partnership from someone who understood what it meant to exist outside conventional boundaries. All right. The decision came with surprising clarity. I stay, we try this. but I want it in writing, salary, responsibilities, termination conditions. I've learned the hard way that verbal agreements evaporate when convenient. Satisfaction flickered across his face. I'll have the lawyer in Tucson draw up a contract when I deliver the next horse shipment. Fair? Fair. They shook on it again, and this time Lorelei let herself acknowledge the warmth that spread through her at his touch. The weeks that followed settled into rhythm. Mornings spent on correspondence and bookkeeping. Afternoons learning the ranch work alongside Nashoba. Evenings reviewing progress and planning next steps. Peco and Tomas returned from Tucson, and Dulcinea arrived with tamales, and a shrewd assessment of Lorelei that apparently passed muster because the older woman immediately began teaching her proper riding technique. You sit a horse like you're waiting for it to apologize for existing. Dulcinea announced on the third lesson, adjusting Lorelei's posture with firm efficiency. A horse respects confidence, not timidity. Sit like you belong there. Under her instruction, Lorelei's riding improved from merely adequate to genuinely skilled. She learned to read the land, to spot weather changes hours before they arrived, to understand the complex dynamics of the herd. Peco taught her to rope, laughing good-naturedly when her first 17 attempts ended with the rope tangling around her own legs. You think too much, he advised in his careful English. The rope knows where to go. You just guide it. And through it all, Lorelei and Nashoba circled each other with increasing awareness, professional respect deepening into friendship. Friendship carrying the undercurrent of something neither seemed willing to name. The turning point came in late January, when Lorelei's carefully negotiated contracts with new buyers resulted in sales that exceeded projections by 40%. Nashoba returned from Phoenix with a bank draft that represented more profit in one transaction than the previous 6 months combined. You did this. He spread the paperwork across the kitchen table, his expression caught between disbelief and vindication. 3 months ago, I was barely breaking even. Now I can actually invest in infrastructure, hire another hand, buy breeding stock for the quarter horse program. We did this. Lorelei corrected, reviewing the figures with satisfaction. You raised the horses. I just make sure you got paid what they're worth, Lorelei. He waited until she looked up. You're wrong about one thing. This isn't just fair payment. This is respect. Every one of these buyers treated me like a legitimate businessman because your correspondence gave them no choice. You didn't just negotiate better prices. You changed the entire dynamic. The weight of what he was saying settled over her, the recognition that this work mattered beyond profit margins, that she'd helped shift the balance of power in a system designed to keep him small. Spring arrived in Arizona with sudden, overwhelming force wildflowers carpeting the desert. Colts born in midnight vigils, the land itself seemingly drunk on renewal. The ranch thrived under their combined management, and Lorelei found herself transformed by work that challenged her mind and body in equal measure. She was checking fence lines on a warm April morning when Willow suddenly shied, nearly throwing her. Lorelei recovered, more from improved reflexes than skill, and dismounted to investigate. A rattlesnake, coiled and warning, blocked the path. Easy. Nashoba appeared from the opposite direction, moving with that absolute stillness that she'd learned meant danger. Back up slowly. Don't. But Willow, spooked beyond reason, reared and bolted. Lorelei grabbed for the reins and missed, stumbling backward directly toward the snake. Nashoba moved faster than thought, pulling her sideways hard enough that they both went down in a tangle of limbs. The snake struck where she'd been standing a heartbeat before, then disappeared into the brush. For a moment, they lay frozen in the dust, Nashoba's arms locked around her, her heart hammering against his chest. She could feel his pulse racing to match her own, could smell leather and sage and something indefinably him. You saved my life. Her voice came out shakier than she intended. You would have done the same. But he didn't move, didn't release her, and when Lorelei tilted her head back to look at him, something in his expression made her breath catch. Would I have been fast enough? The question was rhetorical. They both knew she wouldn't have been Lorelei. Her name came out rough, laden with everything neither of them had been willing to acknowledge. I need you to tell me to let go. What if I don't want you to? The words hung between them for one endless moment. Then Neshoba was kissing her with the intensity of months of denial finally breaking, and Lorelei was kissing him back with equal fervor. Every proper Philadelphia prohibition burning away in desert heat. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Neshoba rested his forehead against hers. This is a terrible idea. Probably the worst. Lorelei couldn't stop smiling. What will people say? That the Apache ranchers seduced the Eastern lady who works for him. That we're living in sin. That it's a scandal. His thumb traced her jawline with devastating gentleness. I don't care about any of it, but you might. Lorelei thought of Philadelphia, of Cornelius Blackwell and the life she'd fled, of every rule she'd already broken just by existing in this space. I stopped caring about respectable opinion the moment I got off that train. But Neshoba, I need to know this isn't gratitude or convenience. It's not. He pulled back enough to meet her eyes, his expression absolutely serious. It's you arguing with cattle buyers in correspondence. So eloquent they probably didn't realize they'd been outmaneuvered until after they'd agreed to your terms. It's you learning to rope like your life depends on it because you refuse to be incompetent at anything. It's the way you transform my sister's old room into something that's completely yours while still honoring what it was before. His hand found hers, fingers interlacing. It's everything you are?